The origin of arrogance and shamelessness. The origin of arrogance and shamelessness. The skeleton and reality of rotten. Greed. Where does the deeply ingrained arrogance and shamelessness of Chinese citizens who currently face global condemnation originate from? We thoroughly investigate their distant, historical roots, the regional conflicts surrounding Hunan, and the malicious reality where they distorted and replaced history entirely through single character names, the differentiation of origins, and the eastward migration of the northern lineage. When the An lineage dynasties of the Sumerian civilization, the primordial ruling system we call Hunan, were pushed out of power by the Ur lineage dynasties, a faction of their northern bloodline, the Huaneng forces undertook an eastward migration, passing through regions like Yaodong Cave, dwellings around Shanxi, which they frequently visited. They planted advanced civilization in the Central Plains and laid deep roots. In terms of archaeogenetics, they clearly belong to the northern lineage, such as An lineage. Afterward, they expanded their power mainly by maintaining multi-character power names and systems. On the other hand, among the various indigenous Yaodong residents of the Central Plains, there were factions that flourished after the ice age from the central and southern Yaodong, which had little contact with the West. Those living in Yaodong at the time called themselves Joshin people, and as these groups, who had expanded their power without major friction. In Southeast Asia and southern Central Plains moved northward, a major conflict structure naturally formed between the northern and southern lineages, the social status gap between multi-character and single-character names. Although blood had mixed and intertwined for 5,000 years, making it meaningless to trace pure bloodlines, a clear gap existed within the social structure. Mainly, the upper ruling class used multi-character names and systems, while working-level administrators and lower-level laborers were called by single-character names. This was due to official titles and ruling structures, originating from the ancient five-family or five-direction systems. However, single-character personnel who shouldered field operations suffered from a subtle sense of inferiority, and sometimes vented their dissatisfaction by distorting history in their records. Nonetheless, the social system maintained a framework dividing the multi-character intellectual class, upper class, and single character, middle managers and lower-level laborers, management of the continent, and the reign of Gori, Goguryeo, which took over the role of supreme administrator of the continent following Bayo, and Guri efficiently managed the continent by entrusting the massive waterways and flood control of the entire continent to its kindred, Bekji, and commercial strategic points to Silla. Occasionally, middle managers staged rebellions of local lords throughout the continent, but most were strongly suppressed. However, a faction that grasped immense wealth along the Yangtze River waterway joined hands with a faction of Silla to launch a rebellion, temporarily occupying a part of the continent. But before long, they were completely suppressed by Gori, and the Central Plains regained peace. Zhu Yuanzhang's uprising and the report to the continent. Amidst the rule of Goguryeo, which enjoyed a rare era of great peace, an unprecedentedly massive natural disaster broke out in the 14th century. At this time, single-character middle managers failed to rescue the people and instead indulged in exploitation, filling their own bellies and looking only after their own safety. The hidden truth is that Zhu Yuanzhang, enraged by this, rose in the Nanjing region, defeated the corrupt single character. Officials restored order on the continent and then submitted a memorial report of pacification to the king of Gori, the legitimate ruler of the continent, Yi Songgai's betrayal and the Qing dynasty's cleanup. Later, Yi Seonggi, who had failed to receive proper recognition, while attaching himself to various factions in Shenyang, turned his horse's head out of greed while heading to govern the southern region. He aimed his spear at his allies and settled far away from the Central Plains toward the peninsula. In response, the descendants of Gori rushed back, subdued Joseon and Ming, and established the Qing dynasty. The Qing dynasty strictly governed single-character officials soaked in greed, but fell into an unfortunate position due to the collusion of corner officials cornered, and Western powers rushing forward with modern weapons. In response, new intellectuals launched a movement to save the country. and its people by reviving the spirit of Gori, the birth of communist China, and the historical distortion of single character names. However, even then, a faction newly armed with communism incited people suffering from natural disasters and middle manager greed to establish communist China, keeping the lower-level single character middle managers intact to govern the vast region. In particular, to launder the inferiority complex left by the single character, lower and middle management factions that were once their roots. And to steal historical legitimacy, Communist China still shamelessly commits the outrageous act of distorting and manipulating countless histories and country names across the continent around single character names monosyllables to entirely alter history. In particular, regions like Hunan province, densely populated by the central southern strata of the southern central plains and descendants of Yaodong had been factions that acquired all sorts of schemes and selfishness to survive in barren environments since the past. In this process, the age-old continental distrust and discriminatory temperament that you cannot trust, Hunan people took root, and forces originating from this region, including Mao Zedong, seized power by inciting the suppressed bitterness and greedy survival instinct of lower-level officials. Consequently, a culture where everyone looked only after themselves became widespread throughout the country, and subsequent history is, as we well know, the arrogance, shameless greed, and shameless acts of shredding and modifying history with single-character names that run rampant in the reality of modern communist China, originated from such deep and rotten roots